you know, notably didn't like a lot of people, decided she liked my dad. And my dad always used to say, I have no idea why she likes me, but she invites me to every party. He always thought that was fabulous. And so it was fun for him to be in Hollywood, but he kind of still hadn't found his place. But a major event happened in 1940 when he gave birth to Jodi's dad and my brother, Barrett. And then shortly thereafter, he went back to Broadway. And this was really a turning point in his career. People regard House of Wax as a big turning point in his career, but what happened next was a big turning point. He got cast in a play, who knows why that's over in the corner, called Angel Street. And Angel Street would later be made into a film with Charles Boyd and Ingrid Bergman called Gaslight. But the gist of this play, which became the longest running melodrama on Broadway, is that a man, my father, is trying to get his wife committed to an insane asylum. And so he gaslights her by trying to make her seem crazy. And what he loved was, it was the first time he'd ever been on stage and audiences booed and hissed. He was like, this is for me. I want to be a villain. So that's what he became. He went back to Hollywood. He signed a contract with 20th Century Fox. And this is really his first leading role. It was a play called, movie called Dragonwyck, based on the wonderful novel by Anya Seton. And I show this picture because I love it. It's a young Jessica Tandy in that movie. And in this movie, my dad kills off not one but two wives, sort of like, you know, a precursor of things to come in his career. And he plays opposite the incredibly beautiful Jean Tierney. It's just one of my favorite films. He plays a sort of an opium addict. And then he begins to get cast in many more villainous roles. This is him in The Song of Bernadette, another incredible part. And my favorite Vincent Price movie. People always ask me my favorite Vincent Price movie, Laura. But Glorious Film. Those of you who haven't seen it, it is one of the top 3 film noirs, which is an incredible genre, and he really plays against the Vincent Price type. But I think the reason I like it is because of that, but also because it's this opportunity for me to kind of see who he was underneath his persona, because he was a gentleman from the South. He wasn't a cad like Shelby Carpenter, but it's an incredible, incredible movie, and they had a lot of fun making it. More than once they were thrown off the set by Otto Preminger for laughing. And there he is, again, in Laura. So now all of a sudden his career is starting to take off, and just as it, you know, is taking off, he and Edith get divorced. It's his parents' 50th wedding anniversary, and they both die within 2 years of one another. And so within the space of basically 2 years, both his parents die, and he's divorced, and so he's alone, living alone. But a handsome man, like that's him with his beloved dog Joe. And any of you who are pet lovers out there, you can find rare copies of it in used bookstores, but he wrote a book called The Book of Joe about all of the pets in his life. It's a great book, and that's Joe. So a handsome man like Vincent Price isn't going to stay single for long, and that's my brother, Jodi's dad. And so he met my mom, and my mom was a costume designer on Broadway, and she came to Hollywood to design a movie that he was the star in. They completely, spontaneously married one night on a trip to Tijuana. That would be their wedding photo. Honeymoon trip on my ass. I am the ass. Tijuana, Mexico, 1949, and the marriage lasted for 23 years, so just goes to show, right? They were really a wonderful couple in many ways, because my mother was as curious about the world as he was. She was a really creative go-getter. She was a costume designer who became an architectural designer, and she really loved to promote my dad's career. I think they made quite a good go of it. She was a collector in her own right. And during this time, his career began to take off again. He signed a contract with RKO, And he did, theoretically they should come up, a bunch of movies with Jane Russell, who was fabulous. We all called her Aunt Jane. And then something very interesting happened. He was graylisted during the McCarthy era. Now, what that means is that people were going around looking for anyone who had communist leanings. People who were blacklisted during the McCarthy era, many of them took their own lives, were forced to leave the country. It was a horrible period of a witch hunt in America. But there were other people whose lives were affected who were graylisted. They were put on lists, and the studios were encouraged not to hire them. And the list that my father was on was called the Pre-War Anti-Nazi Sympathizers. Okay, so we're going to unpack that one. What that meant was, if before the war you were against the Nazis, theoretically a good thing, right? You must have been a communist, and therefore you shouldn't work. Eleanor Roosevelt was on that list too, so he was in good company. But my dad, as I said, he was a workaholic. He loved to work, and for him not to work for an entire year, he was riddled with anxiety and freaked out. And so he used his connections from the art world, and he basically signed some papers that allowed him to work again. And in a funny way, he sold his soul to the devil a little bit. He wrote some things in those papers that I'm sure he later regretted. But for him, it meant the opportunity to work. And so when he was finally getting calls again, he was offered 2 jobs. One was in a play on Broadway called We're No Angels, and the other was for a movie with this brand new technology called House of Wax. And he picked the movie for 2 reasons. One, because he got to play an artist, and the other was because he thought, well, a new technology, let's try it. Now the thing is, art had continued to be a huge part of my dad's life. He founded museums, he was on museum boards, he started a gallery in Los Angeles. It really was the great passion of his life. And so the idea of playing this artist whose entire work is destroyed, and also coming straight out of having not been able to work himself and feeling like his own career was about to be destroyed, that really, I think, is what gives his character that juice in House of Wax, and it is a great part. But the other reason I think he felt that House of Wax was great was because it didn't overuse the gimmick. All the other directors were trying to do like too much with the 3D. But Andre de Toth, who was the director of House of Wax, only had one eye. If you only have one eye, you cannot see in 3D. So he's directing a 3D movie and he has no idea what all the fuss is about. And other people have to say, oh, throw in a little 3D something there. So I think my dad felt that it really stood up because it was a great story. And there he is with Igor, a young Charles Bronson. I have to digress because, well, maybe I'm not going to digress. Let's see. We did a House of Wax benefit in my hometown of Santa Fe, and I look up, we were having a costume contest, and there was a guy who wheeled in on a wheelchair, and he looked exactly like my dad in the House of Wax. It was the freakiest thing I've ever seen. It was very cool. And, so my dad got this real kick out of being in a hit movie. And it was a hit movie. It ran for over a year. And he was actually doing a play on Broadway while it was in theaters in New York. And so sometimes he would go in and see if audiences were still liking it. And he liked to sit behind teenage girls who were freaked out. And they'd be, shivering and shaking through the whole movie. And he'd be, enjoying it all. And then when the credits would roll, he would lean forward and he would say, "Did you like it?" My dad, another of his great passion was Native American art, and he was one of the first people to champion the art of Native Americans. There he is with my brother with their concho belts. I just think that's a hilarious picture. And there he is still deep sea fishing. But he had less and less time for leisure. I don't know what this is. But he still managed to always find time for art. And he and my mom came to be regarded as some of the great art collectors and art movers and shakers on the West Coast. He always loved this picture of himself. He collected Native American pottery, and he said, I bet I'm the only actor in Hollywood about whom you can never say he doesn't have a pot to piss in. And he wrote a book during this time as well, which is a wonderful book called I Like What I Know, and it's about his journey in the arts. And really, the arts saved his life. You know, they were the thing that gave his life meaning, and I think made him not kind of go Hollywood, because he felt that there was something more important than just being famous. But of course, the horror career was taking off. He began doing The Fly, he began doing the William Castle films. I know this will get a huge takeaway. When we were working on the Vincent Price website, we decided that, you know, really his thing is that he was the elegant side of evil. And I think really no part captures that more than Frederick Loren. That's such a great, great part. The Tingler, such a great film. And yesterday I had the pleasure of looking at one of the original manuals sent out to the movie theaters for how to install Percepto. How cool is that? We should be doing that more. So here he is at the height of his fame. And who knows what's going to come up next. He goes to Rome to make a movie that a number of you have told me was your favorite, The Last Man on Earth. And it's a great film. And he loved the book and he loved the part, but he also loved the opportunity to be in Rome because he got to see all the art and buy art. But while he was there, they went to visit a friend, a woman named Deanna Durbin, an actress up in Paris. And my mom all of a sudden didn't want to eat all the gourmet food that they love to eat. All she wanted to eat was Chinese food. And my dad's like, we're in Paris. Why do you want Chinese food? Me. I was the reason she wanted Chinese food. She was 44 and he was 50, and very unexpectedly, I came along. And so, you know, here he is at a time where most people are not, you know, working as much, and he is incredibly busy. But he always had time to be a great dad. That's one of my favorite pictures of the two of us. And here we get to my horror trauma. So I'm going to share, you know, the kind of things you're really only supposed to share in therapist's office. Okay, so they take me to see this children's play. It's a children's play called Peter Pan. Should be fun. I'm about 4. My dad is in it. Everything's going to be great. Now I should tell you that my mother was a shy person, and she was British. So displays of any kind of emotion in public were not good. She takes me to this play, and I freak out. I mean, freak out, like loudly. We're in the audience, and I'm like, Dad's got a hook! And she can't shut me up. So she had to take me backstage during intermission to prove that everything would be okay. That's an unhappy child. So he's trying to convince me that it's going to be okay, and I'm pretty stressed out about it. It's getting better. He's kissing my hand. All right, I got a little bit of smile down, and finally I'm playing with the hook, so it's all good. After that, you know, my parents really thought, this girl, horror movies are not going to be for her, so they didn't let me watch any of the scary movies, which was probably smart. And, you know, so I knew that my dad was a horror actor, but I knew it because he was in things like Batman and you know, played Egghead and you know, made fun of himself. But meanwhile, the rest of you are enjoying him in these great movies. So The House of Usher, The Pit and the Pendulum, classics. I think this is probably one of everyone's favorites. And, you know, it's really fun to watch. I mean, Nick Rogue's cinematography, and oh my God, the color saturation in that movie is amazing. That's a really fun one to watch. But you know, he always managed to have fun doing it. I love that picture of him. And for him, the opportunity to work with Boris and Basil and have fun. And the story I like best is the story that Roger Corman tells about making this movie. Because Boris was a pretty much by the book, by the script kind of actor. And Peter Lorre had been, you know, brought up and come to adulthood in the German expressionist theater of Brecht and improv and all this stuff. And so, you know, here's Peter Lorre, like he had no clue what's in the script, and he's improvising, and Horace is like trying to read the lines and figuring out. And my dad was the intermediary. You know, he was the person who would show up prepared, who was always professional, but he was loose and fun guy, and he actually made them all work together and get along. So, and they had a blast doing it, as you can tell from some of these films. And God only knows what that was supposed to be. Well, a little squished picture of my parents. Kind of going back to what else was going on. They wrote this very famous cookbook. They also started an art collection for Sears Roebuck. And my dad went all over the country buying art for Sears, and he bought 2,000 pieces of art, and my mother framed every piece. So you could buy a Picasso, a Dali, a Whistler, or an emerging artist on your Sears credit card with a money-back guarantee. And the cookbook was part of all of that. They saw themselves as collectors of experience. They went through the world always excited to learn something, and they would bring it back and share it. And this is you know, the food didn't have to be fancy. This is a picture from the cookbook of them at a Dodger game. And the house became sort of a centerpiece of the community in terms of the arts. And that's my brother, Jody's dad, and me. And all of us, you know, we traveled a lot together, and it was a wonderful, wonderful way to grow up. He was an extraordinary dad, and I loved him a lot. I always include this picture because it's us on Halloween. People always want to know what was Vincent Price like on Halloween. So we had parties together, but the best Halloweens, we had this RV, and we always knew what the best streets that had the best candy on them in Beverly Hills were, so we would park there. And my dad would take us out trick-or-treating. So we'd go up to the door, and we'd, you know, get our candy, and then my dad would pop out from the bushes and scare everyone so they would have their Vincent Price Halloween. So it was pretty great. And that's me getting my first bite, but that's the shop in our house where my mom framed all of those Sears things, and I have no idea why some of these pictures are doing this, but this is one of my favorite pictures of my dad. This is at one of my birthday parties. My dad is having way more fun than any of my friends. Look how much fun he's having. He loved it. This is one of my favorite films, Witchfinder General. It was a very difficult movie for him to make, but you know, he was always a consummate professional, so even though he and the director were having a difficult time, he would do incredibly generous things. Like one day he went out and he bought enough food to make the entire cast and crew, like 75 people, dinner, in the midst of probably one of the most miserable filming experiences he ever had. But, you know, it really pushed him, and I think it's one of the best roles. And so we come to the end of the 60s, early 70s, and something new happens in his life. And we'll hopefully roll along here. He makes a couple of great movies in England called After real classics. And then he gets hired to do a third movie in England. And it's a movie where a lot of the great British stars are invited to participate. And they play theater critics who diss him. My dad plays a Shakespearean actor. So my dad decides to do what all actors really secretly in their heart want to do, exact his revenge by killing them off. And the female critic was played by a very attractive and brilliant Australian-British actress named Coral Brown. And in the movie, he electrocutes her under a hairdryer. And I've come to realize in later life that maybe my life would have been different and a little bit better had that really happened. But in fact, what happened, and Jody's for sure, but in fact what happened was he married her. He left my mom and married Coral Brown. And while that was a very difficult thing for all of us because Coral loathed children and was very possessive of my father, it was a wonderful thing for him. He just gained this completely new life. I mean, he came to life. My mother and he had sort of narrowed, as one often does in a relationship, and Coral was like Technicolor coming into his life. And they were a wonderful, wonderful couple together. And she was also brilliant. She was a brilliant actress, but she was also very, very smart about advising him to do some incredible things. So he went out and he lectured on the visual arts for 30 years. Every January and February, he lectured 60 cities in 65 days on the visual arts all over the country, encouraging people to enjoy the arts. And he did a play, a one-man show, where he played Oscar Wilde at the end of his life. And I think it's the best thing he ever did. It was called Diversions and Delights, and that was all Coral's doing. It was an incredible thing. And when the play ended, he actually got in a van with his crew and took that play all over the country so that people could see that play about Oscar Wilde at the end of his life. It was extraordinary. With Coral, he also discovered that if you're famous and you're in your 70s, cruise ships will invite you to go and be their guest. So they had a great time seeing the world together and went all over the world. He got to be Vincent Price and see the world. And by this time, he's kind of becoming the icon that we know him to be. And somewhere over there, I think is, who are we missing? Chris, Peter, John Carradine, sorry, he's cut out of the picture. And he becomes the host of Mystery. So Vincent Price is becoming the icon we know him to be. And then something extraordinary happens. He's doing a show on Disney called Read, Write, and Draw. And somebody says, there's this young animator who's this big fan of yours, and I want you to meet him. And my dad goes down and he meets this kind of quirky guy with wild hair who's drawn this wonderful little mini movie called Vincent, about a little boy named Vincent Malloy who wants to grow up to be Vincent Price. And of course, Tim's really nervous. This is his idol. This is the man he grew up admiring. And my dad agrees to narrate the film. And I think Tim felt that that was, a wonderful gift on my dad's part. But my dad loved Vincent. But to me, Tim returned the favor 10,000-fold, because we all know that so many actors sort of fade away, and my dad loved to work, and my dad loved his audiences, and Tim gave my dad this incredible swan song to his career. He wrote Edward Scissorhands for him, so it was an incredible. I love that picture of them on the set. I think of my dad every day. Just yesterday I was across the river at the Barnes Foundation, and the way that the Barnes Foundation is hung is it's very idiosyncratically hung. It's not hung chronologically, it's not hung by theme. There's sort of this sense that Mr. Barnes saw this flow. And I was standing there looking at this wonderful portrait from the 1600s by Frans Hals, a Dutch painter, of a bearded man. And this weird sort of clown-like, garishly colored painting catches my eye. And I look over there trying to see who it is, and it's sort of this, looked like a lot of the scary clowns that I've seen here today. And I heard my father's voice in my ear saying, "Oh look, Mr. Barnes collected Red Skelton." I swear I heard him. I think of my dad every day, and I miss him every day, but I feel so incredibly fortunate, who knows what's going to come next, to have had this time at the end of his life with him. And